Welcome to Grey Lodge Podcasting.
Together and join me in giving a very warm Exozone welcome to Freeman of the Freeman Perspective. Well, I hope with this lecture to give you the eyes to see, the heart to think, and the mind to feel. We're going to trample upon some belief systems today and have a look at what I've termed the Sorcerers of Atlantis. We are looking at a world that is going into chaos, into absolute disorder, and we're wondering why. And I've come before you not to give you the answers, but the more proper questions. And you, being of the esoteric realms, are going to understand what I'm saying more than most of the people I speak with. So let's just open with some basics here, and this is going to be basic for some of you magicians, in just understanding the concept of magic itself. So, welcome to the Sorcerers of Atlantis. So the first concept, just to understand magic in the beginning, is that magic is the use of your imagination coupled with the will. And so just as you start to look into definitions of magic, it seems every magician has his own. And so we'll just look at a couple. That magic is the art of effecting change in the consciousness at will. And with this ability to be able to transmit this consciousness into reality. So to practice magic, both the imagination and the will must be brought together in union. We may say the realm of magic is that of which human beings believe that they may directly affect nature and each other for good or ill. And by their own efforts, even with the precise mechanism not completely understood, is distinct from appealing to divine powers, or what is known as prayer. So really, the world is magical, but designed to make us think that we are not magi. Now, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, the founder of the Theosophical Society, she says that the art of divine magic consists in the ability to perceive the essence of things in the light of nature. And by using your soul powers of the spirit to use to produce material things from the unseen universe. And in such operations, the above and the below must be brought together to act harmoniously. So magic is spiritual wisdom, but arcane knowledge, misapplied, is sorcery. Keep going. Now, the concept of magic has been studied over millennia, and I would even tell you tens of thousands of years. It's a knowledge that has been passed down through the ages and come to us in many different forms. Now, one of the concepts that I look at most is the order of esoteric magic or ceremonial magic being expressed by our world leaders. Now, most don't look into these realms and consider that what we're looking at in politics, economics, and religion are actually acts of sorcery. So now, many books have been written by Freemasons on the ancient civilizations that existed prior to this one. And from this have drawn knowledge as to what's going on in planet Earth. Now, Manly P. Hall, he's the founder of the Philosophical Research Society, a 33rd degree Freemason and an eminent scholar on these topics. And he tells us that ceremonial magic is the ancient art of invoking and controlling spirits by a scientific application of certain formula. And a magician enveloped in sanctified vestments and carrying a wand inscribed with hieroglyphic figures could, by the power vested in certain words and symbols, control the invisible inhabitants of the elements and of the astral world. While the elaborate ceremonial magic of antiquity was not necessarily evil, there arose from its perversion several false schools of sorcery, or black magic. In Egypt, the black magicians of Atlantis continued to exercise their superhuman powers until they had completely undermined and corrupted the morals of the primitive mysteries. Thus, black magic dictated the state religion and paralyzed the intellectual and spiritual activities of the individual by demanding his complete and unhesitating acquiescence in the dogma formulated by the priestcraft. Now, Freemasonry, most don't realize, they think that this is perhaps just a social club and that these boys group, they get together, they drink their beer, and they have their good time. But as we start to look deeper and deeper into what's plaguing civilization, we can't help but continually come back to Freemasonry. They seem to be at the heart of everything. So now, what is Freemasonry? What are these men doing? And what we recognize is that they actually are performing an ancient Hebrew mysticism known as Kabbalism, and many of you are familiar with. So the definition of Freemasonry as a science of morality veiled in allegory and illuminated by symbols. It is a philosophy, a science, a system of doctrines which is taught in a manner peculiar to itself by allegories and symbols. That's its internal character. And so it's for each individual magician or mason to discover the secret of masonry and the meaning of its symbols by reflection. Albert Pike was a lead magician within the Freemasons, 33rd degree Freemason, and he outlined morals and dogma, which is the Bible of Freemasonry, as it were, and expresses at least 72 times its Kabbalistic nature. Now, where does Kabbalism come from? How has this been brought down to us? Why is it still expressed today? It is said by Manly P. Hall that Kabbalism actually was the soul of the law. So as Moses went up above the mountain, went up the mountain following that UFO or burning column and talked with the burning bush that some call God, he was given the Torah, or the first books of the Bible, the Pentateuch. And this was the law. But as he came back down and went back up, he was given the soul of the law. And then finally, on his third trip up the mountain, was given the soul of the law, which we know as Kabbalism. And this is the origins of Kabbalism. Now, Moses was one that was raised by pharaohs in the ancient past. And so he himself was trained in all the magical acts of the pharaonic magic. So as you look into the Bible, you'll see where Moses and the Egyptian magicians actually duel, creating frogs and plagues. And well, they got to lice, and that's when Moses actually beat the magicians of the Egyptian pharaoh, because they couldn't create lice. But the Egyptian connections with Kabbalism are unescapable. So I won't go too deep into explaining Sephiroth and whatnot, because I know most of the people here have a basic concept of this. And Kabbalism is actually to understand the great operations of the nature of God and the origin of the material world, the relationship of God to man. The physical universe is seen as the result of emanations or frequencies, outflowings from the deity. So what we realize is that the Sephiroth represent frequencies that are emanated from the one source that we term God. They run down through the levels of will, wisdom, understanding, love, strength, harmony, glory, victory, foundation, and kingdom. And that is their English translations. Now, Albert Pike, the 33rd degree Freemason, clearly believed that virtually all Masonic symbols are based from Kabbalism. And Kabbalism is an exercise in the acquisition of intuitive knowledge, or gnosis, the true gnosis. So you start to know things without really recognizing where these things come from. There is a dark side to this as well, and we know these as the quilopothic powers, or the dark side of the tree of the light. The fallen angels are also referenced as excrement. These are the shells, the evil side, the dark magic. And they are represented by two contending powers, which we'll discuss a little more, and ideas of lying and evil and deceit, and really just the ego interjecting where the spiritual should be. So these sephira are representations of the emanations of God, and they each contain their own frequency, which we use these symbols to describe. And each one has its own particular characteristics running through the different frequencies or emanations from God. And you go through the 10 sephira, and their paths are denoted by other symbols, which we know of as the tarot and the tarot cards. So each tarot card is a representation of a path on the tree of life, which is a map of the consciousness or the super consciousness that magicians are trying to express to us, to give us a method or a map in order to understand how to travel into these astral realms and bring about the desired effect. So I myself found that I was traveling within the tarot in the archetypal forms without ever recognizing it. When I first began in my understandings and in my travels, I actually just jumped into a van and I was making juggling sticks. And as I was sitting there in Kansas making juggling sticks, I recognized that people were buying these from me faster than I could sell them. And I thought to myself, well, I could do this anywhere. So I just jumped in a van and started to leave. Along the way, I ended up with a fool's unit. Now, if you're going to be a true magician, you cannot escape the foolish nature of the child, right? If you're going to be uptight, stuffy, and doing just the mechanical nature of things, then you're not expressing your true love and your divine being. I myself, as I jumped in that van and started juggling my way across the nation, found that right as I was getting into my van, a little black and white spotted dog with polka dotted feet started pawing at my ankle. I had no idea where I was going or what I was going to do. I just knew I could juggle. And I guess this little dog did too. But as I stepped off, I was the exact archetypal fool. As I didn't know where I was going as I stepped off that cliff, but yet I had my companion with me along the whole way. So I juggled about. Yeah! Well, as I left, I also had a friend with me that I like to name Alistair Morrison, because he was quite a cross between Aleister Crowley and Jim Morrison. And he had brought with him an entire magician's library, which I was a little concerned about carrying all that weight in the VW van. But he started teaching me, it did eventually blow up the van, but he started teaching me the ideas of magic and the understanding of these different esoteric arts. And he brought to my attention the Freemasons for the first time. And I started to understand that this was all interrelated with my life, and I had not any idea that this was so until I was about 25, 26, and I started to find out that my father was a Freemason, worshipful master, and I didn't know any of these things until I met this magician, and I had moved into the second essence or emanation of the tarot as his magician's library got left in my lap. I lost the magician, but I kept the library, so I had started to gain understanding into what it means to say that you're a magician, or what it is, these esoteric arts and the ancient mysteries. Now, as I did, I discovered that, it was very interesting for me in the concepts of ancient astronauts and its connections to Freemasonry, because when I realized I had seen the compass square and G, the symbol of the Freemasons, and I found out that this symbol looked very familiar to me, and I couldn't figure out why. And it turned out that when I was a child, I used to play Battlestar Galactica with my friends, and I actually would wear my father's Masonic cufflinks as my space insignia. And that's how I recognized that my father was a Freemason. So I started asking him about it, because he actually was worshipful master of the Kaiserslautern Lodge in Germany. And I found that he actually was, at the time of my birth, building nuclear missiles for Martin Marietta. Now, most of us here do believe in nuclear missiles and atomic bombs, although I don't think any of us have ever seen one. My father built them and I never saw one. But yet we are taught to believe in such things because we've seen pictures of them. We have seen scientists talking about it. We've seen videotapes. Now, the curious thing is that my father also chased flying saucers for Project Blue Book. Now, the truth of the matter is that we have the same amount of evidence. We have videos, we have pictures, we have scientists and government officials telling us that they exist. But yet, we're trained into a belief system that doesn't allow such things. So even though we've never seen an atomic bomb, we believe in one. Even though we've never seen a flying saucer, perhaps there's probably more of us in the room that have seen flying saucers than atomic bombs. We don't believe in them. And where do these belief systems come from? And as I started to recognize that my father was a ritual magician, high worshipful Freemason, worshipful master in his top hat, wearing his little apron and casting his corn, wine, and oil to bring about certain spirits or emanations into buildings, I started to realize there was a little more to this Freemasonry than I had any clue about. On top of that, my father was on Killer One submarine with Jimmy Carter, and we'll find that the submariner realms are quite interesting as well, and perhaps even more top secret than outer space. So then I moved in and moved on, and I found myself in a new position. Now I had some understanding, and I started blabbing about it to everybody. And I started to come to conclusions in the symbolisms that I was seeing, and I started to express this to people, and this brought me to where I was supposed to be. I was actually just driven and led forward through synchronistic events to come and stand here before you now. I didn't choose to do this nor know anything. It all came to me. And so, as I started to decipher different things and understand the meanings of the Kabbalism, it became more and more, and all of a sudden my life was surrounded by it. And I moved to Austin, and I started to see more and more clues as to what's going on. And I was led to this understanding of our goddess, this goddess Columbia. And I believe I am the only expert on the goddess Columbia. I did once offer a $1,000 bounty on her head to see if anybody could give me any information on Columbia at all. And no one could, and I knew they wouldn't. Because I study very hard, and I knew no one else had come to any ideas. But our goddess, actually, the District of Columbia, Columbia Broadcasting Systems, Columbia University, all of the Columbias that we have, I wanted to know why our capital was named after this goddess. And when I got to Austin, I started to notice that it was highly a goddess city. It was based all of the symbolism that I saw, because what happens is that we find that she is represented often with an owl. You'll find her with the owl on all kinds of features. You'll find her as Minerva with the owl, Athena with the owl, and Columbia with the owl. And as I found that our leaders were going up into the Northwest Mountains in Bohemian Grove and worshiping a 40-foot stone owl, I started to think that perhaps things are a little stranger. And I recognized that all of these symbols went back to the goddess, but what did that mean? Even to the fact that they have banks designed to look like an owl, and Hooters, of course, is self-explanatory. Now, Columbia is the title of Columbia Broadcasting Systems, and I found this very interesting in their symbolism, because if you recognize that ABC is the symbol of ABC, which is the Trinity, and this is where we're getting all of these, the Kepler-Bina-Chokma connections, the Trinity. And then you look at NBC, which is the Phoenix, or the Peacock, which is the symbol of the goddess Juno. And then we get to CBS, which is Columbia Broadcasting Systems, and of course their symbol is the eye. Well, the eye in Hebrew, as we're looking at this as Kabbalism, and all Kabbalism is based out of Hebrew, the eye is Ayin, which is the devil, of course, in the Torah. So we actually have a symbol of the devil as the goddess. She was, Athena now was known for her spear shaking, and we will get to her in a little deeper. We won't leave. We got more to say about this lady here. She is known as the goddess of 1,000 names, and definitely unveiling the goddess as I entered into the next step of the Tarot was a big portion of my understanding. So she means door. She is an expression of a pathway, and Dallas, of course, is the one way of saying this. So Dallas, Texas, of course, is a Hebrew word saying that this is the door, the portal of the goddess. And so you'll start to understand why the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders are symbolized by a pentagram. Now, this goddess is a deep question, and as I kept looking deeper, I kept going further and further off planet, and I started to wonder, well, what's going on here? Because I would constantly come across the fact that Isis and Horus is absolutely no different than Mary and Jesus. And then in each of these images, we find extraterrestrial types of situations where there's actually a flying craft behind Mary in that painting, and then her expression as Inanna, or Ishtar, Inanna, in the Sumerian realms, and she is depicted in a flying suit, as if she were a spacefaring person. So then I moved on to where I am now, into the Emperor, where I'm actually maybe starting to gather a little bit of expression of who I am, and maybe moving into my placement. Most will tell me that I am doing exactly what it is that I'm supposed to be doing. But it wasn't my emperorsness that I was concerned with, but the emperors that rule our planet. And as you see, the emperor is signified by the letter H, and he means window. So as we start to get a little more symbol literate and start to decipher the codes that the Illuminati or the secret elite rulers of our planet are placing before us, we start to get a little idea of what they think history of the world is. So what you'll recognize here now is the god Mars. And I have not been able to escape Mars in all of my studies of the Freemasons and the high elite. But what you'll recognize here is that the Windows XP. Now I'm going to get into all kinds of corporate logos and symbolism that are placed directly in front of you that we haven't managed to decipher. And I think I found the key, and it is Kabbalism. So what we see here is the Windows XP. Well, the XP is actually the symbol Chi Rho, and Chi Rho is the name for El Kahir, which is where Cairo, Egypt, actually means Mars. So Chi Rho means Mars. So Windows XP would mean Emperor of Mars, because Windows being the word signifying the Emperor. Or if we look a little deeper, we find that man himself is signified as a square. You'd be a square man in Freemasonry, or just the very simple symbol of the square is one of mankind in the four elements. And the red square, of course, would be, red being the symbol of Mars, would be Mars man. And if you throw in the H, then you've got the Emperor of Mars once again. Mars has been one that has been very attractive to our elite, and if you start to recognize the occultic nature of our space program and realize that these magicians aren't simply just trying to perform ceremonial magic, but are actually in a mood to get off the planet, and that all of the different occult orders have come together, or not all of them, but occult orders have come together to design and create our very space program. You'll recognize that in Project Paperclip, the Nazis were actually brought over to America in order to design rockets and build our space station. And they were founded, or their space shuttles and our rockets, when they were founded from the Thule Society, which raised Hitler through their occultic realms. And I personally believe he was possessed and invoked a spirit that perhaps he couldn't handle. But if you look at the Boeing poster for Mars, their Prometheus Mars mission, you'll actually see the sun low on the horizon, and that's a common motif of these Illuminati. And it shows two astronauts walking up on the Martian hill, coming upon Sumerian architecture on Mars. Now this is the official Boeing poster for the Mars mission for Prometheus, to bring back the fire of the gods. And as I started to look deeper and deeper, I began to believe that perhaps Atlantis was Mars, being that the pyramids of Mars were far superior to the pyramids of Giza, and the pyramids of Giza being far superior to anything we can design in the 21st century. We cannot build the pyramids of Giza. They came here from somewhere else, or a time before. So all of the symbols that we start to see actually have meaning, and once you got the key, they all start to open up and give expressions of their own, and you can start to decipher and understand what the Illuminati or the Secret Order actually believe and consider their history. So each of the corporate logos that we look at here are all signified within one system, and that is the aspects of Freemason ritual. So as you find that you'll have the symbol of the compass and square, the cube, the rising sun, the canted square, which is the 47th proposition of Euclid, the oblong squared Templar symbols, such as the double cross of Exxon, or the golden arches, we'll get to that. And then of course Hebrew and Tarot and the pentagram, in which these are all based out of Kabbalism from also Rosicrucianism and brought into our expression. So that when you see that Shell has a shell as their logo and Texaco has a pentagram, I was going through all these different ones, Citgo, the pyramid, and Chevron, the double cube, and if you understand the magician's altar, it's a double cube, and these are the methods of magic. And as I got to Phillips 66, you'll be very curious as to what I found. One like Compass Bank, to me this is quite obvious, it's the compass within a square, and the symbol in the center is a sun, and so you've got your compass, square, and sun again. The sun sign of Target, which is a hermaphroditic symbol. These are all a unified system and signs of allegiance, so that the Brotherhood knows who's in. And once you realize this, you'll realize there is no corporatism without Freemasonry, and they are the head of the fascist state. So perhaps you wouldn't believe that they have so much control, but if we look into the Masonic Bible, we find that in the galaxy of notables in early American history, one finds these distinguished Masons. George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Paul Revere, Alexander Hamilton, Patrick Henry. Actually, once you start to realize it, you'll realize that the Boston Tea Party was nothing more than a false flag terrorist event spawned by the Freemasons to direct civilization in the methods that they saw fit. And we are serving an agenda that is outlined by them. As the history, we'll find that actually there were only two generals in the Civil War, in the Revolutionary War, that were not Masons. And we find that the Masons are sworn to one another in a brotherhood pact where they're sworn not to harm one another or even give allegiance to another, even if he's an enemy in war. And so they have stories in their Holy Bible talking about how they'll rescue an enemy Mason and bring him to safety. So if we have these two polarity sides, say England and America, and they're warring against one another, but yet everybody in charge of both of these powers are sworn allegiance to one another, then who's dying in the middle is my question. Okay, go ahead. Now, once we start to recognize that this has never been a nation of free people, that we've never actually elected a president, or else these are the greatest men in the world, and I guess they should be in charge, but I think that you should know them by their fruits and recognize that they shouldn't be. But absolutely 51% of our presidents, including I believe the first 13, were all members of Freemasonry. Now, do you think that we actually elected one? If all of the presidents come from a single fraternity. Now consider our latest election. That is actually, we were given the choice of Skull and Bones member 1 or Skull and Bones member 2, which, it's your choice. Take your pick. Now, Freemasonry cannot escape its extraterrestrial roots either, and what we find out is that it's based on Solomon's Temple, and this is their earliest mythos, or, well, you find 3 histories for Freemasonry, one that starts in ancient Atlantis and leads up to today, or their mythology of the building of Solomon's Temple. Now, I found it very interesting that in the building of Solomon's Temple, King Hiram of Tyre was called upon to help King Solomon to build this temple. And King Hiram of Tyre is one of the people that was actually taken off of this planet by the gods, according to Zechariah Sitchin. And there are very few people that have gotten to leave the planet. Enoch was one. Ezekiel kind of got a ride. And then King Solomon. Well, King Solomon returns and he's got King Hiram, I'm sorry, it's King Hiram of Tyre that was lifted off the planet, returns with this strange character, Hiram Abiff, and he seems to be the first master mason of Freemasonry according to their belief system. And so you actually can't escape the extraterrestrial roots of Freemasonry either. They don't live even in the same year that we do. For the Freemasons, they go by the Anna Lucius calendar, and you'll find that it's actually the year 6007 at this point, which is dated back to ancient Sumer and the Sumerian times. They worship different deities than many expect, and they actually worship a god named Baal, who is symbolized by a bell, and they worship Ar, and she's just many names of many goddesses. But you will constantly see these hermaphroditic or god and goddess symbols as the bell and the goddess, or you've got your erections. Now this particular erection was kind of curious. It was put out in front of the City Hall in Orlando, and they blew up City Hall for the movie Lethal Weapon, and then erected this other ugly monolithic building and put a big penis in front of it. This was to symbolize as Orlando being the first point of light in the 1,000 point of light system. But it wasn't good enough just to have a large erection out front. They went ahead and put a gushing vagina next to it. Because you gotta have both, yes. So what we'll see is that there are constant hermaphroditic symbols that are being used and presented in front of us. And once you realize that it is actually a unified field and not something that is just occurring, you'll start to recognize what's really going on planet. Well, you'll start to have the right questions, I think. But certainly, when we look to Prince and Madonna, we find Baal and Ishtar. And as you see, Prince's logo is the hermaphroditic symbol, or a combination of Mars and Venus, but then also with a hyperdimensional coil gone through it. Prometheus, again, with the goddess, the Volvo, the Mars symbol with the vulva, the hermaphroditic symbol. And as I mentioned, Target's symbol, the sun sign, is also a hermaphroditic or generational symbol. The Star of David, of course, is as well the same. And recently it was adopted by the Raelians, who are a group that have contacted Yahweh and are now preparing to control or clone humans on Earth. And KISS I also found very interesting in my philosophy of things, because of course they are led by the god Bacchus, or the hermaphroditic symbol, as you see with his pentagram and his hermaphroditic outfit. But I found it very curious because you've got the lead singer, and then the lead guitarist, Ace Frehley, is an ancient astronaut, and he was replaced by an Egyptian, and they were all led forth by the familiar cat god Bast, or the cat. And then all of these guys, and he was replaced by the fox, which is another familiar, and they're all led forward by a blood-drinking, fire-breathing dragon lord. Now, Madonna is absolutely a Kabbalist, and she's very proud of it, and we'll get to her a little more. All right. So where do our belief systems come from? How do we end up with these type of concepts? Are they just simply coming out of our consciousness? Do we all have a genetics program that makes us want to make hermaphroditic symbols? Or is perhaps somebody manufacturing our reality? Now, as I look at things, first of all, if anybody can tell me the value of gold. Right. We don't know, right? We have no idea, but yet we base our entire civilization on it. And this planet's actually been mining gold since the creation of civilization as we know it. And you gotta wonder why. But as we look to things, we find that first the gold operations were run by the gods, and everybody would have served the gods themselves. And you look into ancient Egypt, and you'll find that they actually have the generations and reigns of the gods, the years in which they ruled. But this godship got passed down in an interbreeding, a hybrid program where the gods started interbreeding with the humans. And then the pharaonic bloodline, or the godmen, were left in charge, and they were the ones that ran the operations. But soon this wasn't good enough to keep everybody in line, so the godmen developed what we know as religion, and they started controlling and manufacturing reality through the use of religion and your fear of death. So we find the first forms of control were the biggest buildings in town, which were the pyramids, of course, and these were from the gods. But then it passed down to religion, and next thing you knew, the biggest buildings in town were the church steeples. And finally, if you look around, then the banks became taller than the churches as money became the new form of control in the reality manufacturing and focusing of our power. But if you look around today, what you're going to recognize is that the cell phone companies, the telephone companies, are now the largest buildings in town. And as you look to their symbols and their meanings, and you start to question who will be the next L or next Tel, right? People in Nazi Germany would absolutely be proud to be Nazis. And I see it no different here in America. You know, I question people, why is it that you're proud to be an American? All you did was fall out of your mom here. What have you done to deserve pride? And it's always been pride that's been in the way of this thing, and it's pride that leads a magician to sorcery. It's pride that keeps these belief systems in place. And pride doesn't allow you to question. And if you can't question your own belief system, then you are under mind control. So how did they manage to create these belief systems and to fool the people? Well, it turns out it was numerous acts of prestidigitation. And we find that in the early times, in the Roman era, a man named Heron had managed to even design a steam engine back in ancient Rome. And these ancient technologies have been known about and used against the people forever. So what Heron would do would use his high technological advancements like the steam engine to create miracles to fool the people into falling into belief systems. So he would actually design a temple to the gods. When the priest comes out and lights the fire ignites the engine, and that actually would make the doors open on their own, and everybody was shocked and awed and brought into the building and then believed in the magic when it was all simply illusion. Hitler did the same thing as he tried to get everybody to fall into Nazism in his magical spell, and he would stand before everyone with a wall of light behind him and pack everybody in tightly at night and set everybody up in rows. Everything was very organized and set up to create an emotional response. And this is what they want out of us, is a particular response. So they throw in the prestidigitation, and then we all cheer and go, yay, I'm a Nazi. Hitler was actually in contact with other beings of other realms through the Thule Society, and through these means had come to the understanding of how to build flying saucers and other high technological devices, and then use these to trick the population who are completely clueless of their existence. So what is civilization? Would you believe me if I told you that you were born into captivity, that you actually live in a zoo and it's the zookeepers I'm expressing to you right now? Or would you really rather believe that this is actually the outcome of human endeavors and this is what humans have always wanted out of life? As I look into Metropolis, or the civilization, I see that it actually has an agenda that doesn't serve the human at all, but is actually a mining colony, which seems to be for another extraterrestrial or another source, another race, or at least beings that we don't realize that we're doing what we're doing, because absolutely we don't know why we're mining gold. But what does civilization give us, actually, as we look towards it and realize what's going on? It's not working in our favor. We find that civilization gives us environmental destruction. cultural degradation, psychosocial control through fear, economic worship and slavery, pharmaceutical dependency and toxicity, multinational corporate plunder, political and civil corruption, water and sky poisonings, blood contaminations, and genocide. Yeah. So, now civilization is defined as an advanced state of development in human society, marked by progress in the arts and sciences. So what is progress? What are we progressing to? Are we all hoping for a $6 soda and a $20 gallon of gas? What is it that we think we are doing? What is civilization's accomplishment? What is it really trying to do for us? And as you start to ask these questions, you start to come down to, well, it's not serving me. I know that much. So then you start to understand that civilization actually isn't the outcome of human endeavors, but is an agenda which is serving a purpose. One of the main controls of keeping the agenda moving forward is the spell of money. This, what is the value of a dollar? If we don't know the value of gold, then how can we know the value of this piece of paper? But if we look into it as magical realms, we recognize that this is actually a magic talisman or a pentacle, and is used to manipulate society. Its symbols are absolutely based out of magic. The dollar sign, of course, is Hermes Caduceus, and then when you see it with the two columns, these are the twin columns of the Freemasons, the twin columns of Atlantis, Jachin and Boaz, which actually are a Hegelian dialectical control, so that they cause the problem and offer the solution. But it all revolves around our reaction. So they want us to react to particular events so that they can move their agenda forward, and we all have to agree with it. And what money actually does is usurp the very miraculous nature of life, because now you have the ability to say, well, I earned this, or I want this, and no longer are the gifts given to you by life miracles, but of your own ego and your own making. And so money actually is placed before us to usurp the very miraculous divine nature that we all are. These ancients knew about America long before Columbus ever showed up. They've known about the West since Atlantis. The maps that Columbus used to come here were actually ancient maps that were based on more ancient maps, and they depicted the West Coast, and this is the Piri-Reis map. And the conquerors come and they plant their flag, and of course they were the pirates. The Templars' symbol was the skull and bones, along with the double cross, like Exxon. And what were the Templars most famous for? Now, Christopher Columbus did fly the Templar Red Cross flag. But when we start to look into the Templars, you recognize that they were most famous for gold and arches, as they built these structures that no one could understand, and they defied even gravity. The ancient cathedrals took over, and that was when the power of religion started to take over. Now, the Templars themselves had gone and dug under Solomon's temple and found something, and at that point, everyone wanted to be a Templar and were willing to give all of their worldly possessions to be a member of this order, to understand what it is that they had the knowledge of, which none of us really know. Now, nobody really even knows who Columbus was. He was actually most likely a Greek prince, and not Spanish or any of these thoughts that have been passed along about Columbus. Actually, very little is known about the man, the discoverer of America, and he actually was most likely named after our goddess Columbia, because Columbus is the male representation of Columbia. So the goddess Columbia stands there with her angel wings and her fish people, and we'll get to her a little more. Now, who here knows who designed the American flag?
Betsy Ross?
No, Betsy Ross was actually one that sewed it. Do you think that this fraternal order would actually let a woman create the flag?
Yeah.
It was a man known only as the Professor, and his name was never taken down. He was just referred to as the Professor. He met up with Benjamin Franklin, a member of the Hell's Fire Club, and also a high-ranking Freemason, and they got together with George Washington and gathered even the secretary so that they had a magical number of 7, and then they designed, well, mostly the Professor designed the American flag. But of course, you're not taught that in school. And the name America, does anybody know where that comes from? No, it wasn't Amerigo Vespucci. Actually, Murica is the star that the Templars followed. It was given to them in their ancient knowledge. And so the star of the West is what they were following and looking for as they came to America. And so this is named after their star, Murica. The Jehovah's Witnesses dropped this off at my door right before I left, and I was like, oh, I gotta use that. Because it really shows how the belief in the reality manufacturing comes into being. Because if you look here, we've got the short-haired Jesus. And you know, in the time of Jesus, it was said by the Romans, who were a warring tribe, and that's why they had short hair, because short hair is really good for war. They would actually tell the Christians to cut their hairs and act like a Roman. And now the Christians are telling you to do the same thing. But waiting for a savior can be very dangerous, and the Incans were waiting for a savior, and Montezuma had announced the day that Quetzalcoatl would return. And on that very day was the day that Cortez showed up on the beaches, once again flying his Templar flag. And he pulls up to the beaches, and what do the Incans do but say, oh, here are our gods. Now, why did they know that they were their gods? Well, they were waiting for bearded white men. Now, the Incans themselves don't grow facial hair at all, but yet all of their gods are depicted with facial hair. And they knew the day that their god would arrive, and it turned out to be the very day that the bearded white man showed up. So here was Quetzalcoatl. And what did they do for the gods? Mine the planet for gold. Now, the Incans themselves actually didn't remember how to mine. That was an ancient knowledge. They were now simply panning the gold. But they were very excited when the gods showed up and started giving them all the gold. But soon Cortez went in and started slaughtering all of those ancient tribes, and they realized that these weren't the gods they were waiting for. So they started stashing all the gold in the subterranean chambers that had been manufactured by the ancients. And these subterranean chambers actually go for thousands of miles under the earth and have perfectly smooth walls, and nobody can explain how they were created. But they're all over the world. They're in America, they're under South America, Central America, Giza. These subterranean realms are everywhere, and that gold is still hidden down there today. Well, what the Spaniards didn't get. Now, they got a lot of gold. The Incans have been mining this planet for a while. I don't know how I got to this picture. The concept of Jesus, the concept of Lucifer, what we realize is that as I started looking into the symbolism, and I kept coming across the canted square, and I wanted to understand, you know, this was the symbol for Dell Computers, this was the symbol for Enron, for Columbia Clothing, which was actually a canted swastika. And then I was curious as to why Hitler had canted the swastika himself in the symbol of Nazism. So I came to the understanding of the 47th proposition of Euclid, or what is known also as the Pythagorean theorem of the canted square. And what we have is a representation in mathematics of the god, goddess, and the sun. And so the canted square is actually a symbol of this sun god, or the son of God. And if you start looking into Pythagoras, you'll find that he also has extraterrestrial connections, and he actually believed that intelligence got better as you left Earth. But these have been known as the stars of the morning and the sun of the morning, and Jesus is also known as the day star, which of course we know of as Lucifer. So some believe that Jesus actually has other symbolic nature and could quite well be an Amanita muscaria mushroom. And what we find is that actually most of the religions are formed of this mushroom cult, and even the Freemasons and most of magic, and perhaps even in some realms, consciousness itself, came from the mushroom. So as we look to the understanding of why Christmas is celebrated on December 25th, we realize that it's actually due to the sun stopping in its motion and then returning, resurrecting on the third day. So this is where the December 25th came from, and if you asked a Christian why they celebrated Christmas on the 25th, they certainly wouldn't give you the answer that I would, which is because they told me to. So as we start to look into the real symbolic nature of Santa Claus, we find that he's actually a representation or an anamorph of the Amanita muscaria mushroom, and that most of our concepts of the spiritual nature come from the DMT that is produced by the ingestion of the psychedelic mushroom. And the shamans of the North Pole would actually have to battle with the reindeer as they were trying to get the Amanita mushrooms and gather them for this winter solstice celebration. And you would find that the reindeer would very much want to eat the amanitas as well. And when they did, they would actually dash, dance, and prance around and get quite antsy. And of course, the mushroom was prepared by the vixen or the witch, and once you drank of the brew, you saw the comet come your way. And what brought the mushroom was, of course, the rain and Donner and Blitzen, or thunder and lightning in German. So all of Christmas is really just a mushroom ritual. So next year, you know, take the right present. Because really, the Amanita grows under the evergreen tree, and it is the gift that is given under the tree. And then once you take of it, you see all these sparkly lights and auras, right? And they used to store the Amanitas in the tree for them to dry, so that the shaman, or Santa Claus, could take his big bag of goodies and bring it to all of the people. And that's where Christmas actually comes from. Now, what I found was that this DMT research was getting very interesting, and also tapping into trans-dimensional, hyperdimensional realms, or extraterrestrial, however you want to look at it. But they were finding that people that were doing DMT were actually coming back with similar stories of praying mantis people in a whole other realm that was open through dimethyltryptamine. And actually, dimethyltryptamine is most produced upon birth or upon death, but can be induced by these mushrooms. And once you start to look into mushrooms, you realize that their spores can actually travel through space, and that they very much could be extraterrestrials themselves. So our goddess is Lucifer, the idea of Jesus, the day star, the star of morning, Lucifer. Most people connect Lucifer with the devil, but of course there is no biblical connection between Lucifer and the devil. And if you look into it, of course, Venus is Lucifer. The symbols of Venus that I had discovered as I started to recognize that she was Lucifer, the star of the morning, and she is symbolized by the pentagram, because Venus makes a 5-pointed star every 8 years, and of course she's always symbolized by the shell, by her connections with the life-giving waters. But Lucifer is also a friction match, and as you start to decipher corporate logos, there is one movie company that's called Phoenix Pictures, and they make movies about Nazi love, genetic manipulation, child labor camps, starring fine stars such as Sigourney Weaver, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Stephen King. And their movie icon is a Lucifer, a friction match being struck, which becomes a sun low on the horizon, which boils up into the fiery phoenix. So Phoenix Pictures could be read as Lucifer Pictures. So all of these definitions of Lucifer are actually, you find that it's the light bearer, the bringer of light, and of course the star of the morning, Venus, or a friction match is typically the most first definition you'll come to when you look up a Lucifer. And if you look on your diamond friction matches, you'll see the oblong square symbol again. Satan was, I don't know, there is no apple in the story of Adam and Eve. That's all I have to say about So where do these words come from? Who are the masters of words? And Humpty Dumpty tells us that when I use a word in a rather scornful tone, it means just what I choose it to mean, and nothing more, nothing less. And so Alice was wondering, well, the question is whether you can make these words mean so many things. And Humpty says, the question is, which is to be the master? That's all. So now, words themselves are expressions of vibration and emanation. And I went down to the Georgia Guidestones. I don't know if you guys are familiar with these monolithic stones put up in Georgia in Alberta, on which are the rules or guidelines of the new world, the new paradigm. The first being, of course, limiting the population down to 500 million. That's a pretty big drop-off. Yeah. And they go on to state that they're going to create a new living language to unite whoever's left. Go on. So where did this come from in the first place? Does anybody know who crafted English? Where does the English language come from? Well, as you start to look into it, you find that it was actually mostly crafted through the works of Shakespeare and the works of the King James Bible. Now, Shakespeare was known as the Spear Shaker, and is actually a man known as Sir Francis Bacon, who was a Rosicrucian high magician. And he created the English language as we know it today. When I went down to the Guidestones and I saw who had actually authored the Guidestones and who created it, it was R.C. Christian, which of course it says a pseudonym. And I don't think they misspelled that accidentally, because there was a lot of work put in this. I don't think they would just accidentally misspell pseudonym. And I think there's a code in there. But the word R.C. Christian, the pseudonym, is a pseudonym for Christian Rosenkreutz, who is the mythical founder of the Rosicrucian order. And that would identify the small group of Americans that put this stone up. Every language has its own particular frequency. Every symbol that is given to a vowel or a consonant has its own particular frequency. And we find that Hebrew and maybe even Greek actually have a bit of a hyperdimensional nature to them. And these are the base languages, but there's every reason why you were forced to write from left to right. And this all has to do with your imagination and intuition. They don't want you using these things. They want to keep you into a straight linear path, thinking everything is linear. But everything has frequency, and everything is an emanation of frequency. And what you'll find in these guide stones, that not only do we have all the frequencies of language, but the stones themselves are tuned to a particular frequency. So you'll see where it's rough down here at the bottom, but then it gets smooth up on top. You're actually tuning the stone to a particular frequency. This is the same as what was going on in the pyramids of Giza, and what you realize is that the pyramid is not a monument, it is a device. It is built to such restricted standards that we can't even begin to build in this type of capacity, where everything has to be so precise. Now, the only thing that we do build to such precision, of course, is engineering feats. Instruments, engines, and things that need to function within the natural order and must be of a particular design. So the pyramids themselves actually are not monuments, but instruments. They are frequency modulators. And what we find in the king's chamber are these stones that go up over what they call the sarcophagus, but it actually isn't. And they are all tuned to a particular tone and a particular frequency. So we're looking at a giant frequency modulator. As I was leaving the guide stones and I stopped at the gas station, and of course I'm into the corporate logos and the understanding, and if you want to get any more deeper into each of these topics, I got films on all the different topics up front. But the corporate logos, Pyramid Petro just kind of caught my eye, and I looked back and said, what is this? That's me, I don't know, it looks like an alien in a gas mask with a couple swords coming at me, but that's one corporate logo. It's going to take me a little while to decipher.
The symbol of Sikhism.
Yeah, exactly. So frequency modulation is a big portion of this whole story and a big understanding of what's going on, because everything being frequency, they're absolutely manipulating ours. And they have many devices that they have been using, and as you realize that Tesla actually had ancient knowledge given to him because he was allowed into the basements of the Vatican where they store all of that secret high-tech knowledge and even have telescopes to look into deep space. But this knowledge was passed along, and the magicians of our world, the elite, are using technomancy. And so they have designed a giant antenna emitter, an antenna array in Gakona, Alaska, that shoots ultra-low frequency waves up into the ionosphere. And with that, they can manipulate frequencies, causing earthquakes, floods, storms. They have the ability today to generate all the worst parts of Revelations. And I think that they actually have this Armageddon script in place and are planning on enacting, but only once we give our free will agreement. But what's going on right now is that we're entering into this new age, into the new paradigm, and that this is actually a moment as we have been on the astrological cycle. It's a 26,000-year cycle, and you've got 13,000 on the bright side and 13,000 on the dark side, as we are turning to face away from the galactic center. And this 13,000 years that we've just gone through, which is the exact span of our current civilization and the plopping of Samaria and Egypt onto Earth, this last 13,000 years has been in the dark side. This is used also Isaac Bonowitz, who was the only academically accredited magician. He actually gave a thesis, defined and explained magic to a point where Berkeley gave him a degree in it. So he's the only academically accredited magician. And in his thesis on magic, he designed a magical machine that would be able to transmit thoughts or read your mind. And as he described it 25 years before HAARP's creation, he actually described HAARP to a T. So we'll find that this is actually a device that is defined by a magician as magic. Now, many people aren't noticing these giant chemtrails that are going over our heads, and you'll see the grid patterns going on. And what's within these is aluminum and barium, are two of the main ingredients. Now, aluminum makes you a great receptor for electromagnetic frequencies or radio frequencies. You're being turned into an antenna. And the barium actually makes you show up on radar. And this X-radar, X-class radar, is the type of radar that can actually see the barium. As you would go into a hospital and drink barium, it's a radioactive isotope that shows up on radar and X-rays. This device that they sent down, it actually shipped out right before Katrina, and as soon as it started heading on its way up to the HAARP facility from Texas going to Alaska, Katrina snuck in and made some unusual left turns that nobody could explain. But actually, these storms have been generated and manipulated by ionospheric heaters such as HAARP. And we live in a world where they have the powers of God, and nobody seems to know this. So I want to tell you all that these things that are occurring are not natural. They are being manipulated. Earthquakes, floods, and all of the strange weather patterns are coming from the solar eruptions, but then manipulated from these devices of frequency modulation. And of course, the British have just launched the largest nuclear submarine in existence. And, the Submariner worlds are just too hard to find anything out about. All right. So geomancy. Now, as I started to look into this brotherhood and recognize all the different frequency modulation devices that they were using, I wondered if any of these were used today, such as the pyramids were used in the ancient past. And I found this device in Nashville, and it was explained to me by a friend named William Henry, who's making a movie about it. But what we find is that this Capitol Mall is actually a giant frequency modulating device. It's an instrument like a guitar, and I'll show you how it works. But what we find is that its actual shape is a sigil of Solomon and was a seal to bind spirits. And Solomon was known for making many of such devices or frequency modulators to the different gods such as Shamash, Molech, and Asherah. And let's go. So this is the full device here. This is standing out in front of the Nashville Capitol, and that's the Capitol there. And this is the full lawn that comes down. The entire thing itself being a seal to bind spirits. So as we realize underneath it, it announces right there for you that vast numbers of bodies are under this thing. It's built on a Native American burial ground. The device is set up to the different chakras of the human body, and at the foot of the thing, right by the Capitol, you'll find the fountains where the children play, or the lower chakra, and then it moves up to the square, the symbol of man again, and then coming up to the amphitheater. And you'll notice that the amphitheater is guarded over by 2 towers, and there's 7 portals in the back. The amphitheater keeps you focused and facing towards the Capitol, or the form of control, and keeps you down into your lower base chakras, because that's the very placement of it on this device. And it doesn't allow you to consider even the upper chakras that are behind you. If you were in the amphitheater, you wouldn't even know the upper chakras existed. As you move up through these chakras, you get up to the throat chakra, and at that point is a black earth. And actually William was quite worried and concerned about the symbolism of a black earth at the throat chakra, because this would be the point where you would emit love or violence, love or hate, and the black earth seemed to be a symbol of darkness. And it actually is surrounded by these monoliths that show all kinds of war, not nuclear war, the storming beaches, and are all etched into these monoliths. And if you look at this thing, it actually looks like the Stargate of SG-1, with its little pathway leading up into it, and instead of the circular thing, you've got the black earth there. But what I noticed is that it was surrounded in Hollywood, and of course the Hollywood is the symbol of death and resurrection, much like these other symbols that we've seen in Jesus. But the Hollywood is the symbol of death and resurrection, and this is where you actually get these terms, the blockbusters of Hollywood, the Masons of the Druids, right? The blockbusters of the Hollywood. And the guide stones too were also surrounded in Hollywood. And once you get through this device and you get up to the crown chakra, you'll find this circular portion that's like the top of the keyhole, and it's surrounded by 50 columns that are all 25 feet tall with bells in their capitals. And as you go to the center of the pentagram, there's actually a little iron post right in the ground there, just very unnoticeable, but right in the center of the 3 pentagrams that face each other. And if you stand on that iron post and you speak out, everything you say actually reverberates off of these 50 columns, so that anything you say will come back to you from every direction. It's really a trip. And if you step 1 foot off, you get no echo whatsoever. It's perfectly designed to only focus on that one spot where the iron post is. So when you start to look at the entire device, and it's, you'll find that it actually is an instrument, a guitar, a frequency modulation device, which is what a guitar is. And you've got those 7 portals that come out from the stage or the amphitheater and move up to this portion. And there are actually 7 subterranean sulfur rivers that run under this that they're actually going to bring up to the surface to make serpents. So the pentagram is a very interesting symbol and is used often in magic, but we don't tend to question really its origins either, or what it signifies. I've found 4 definitions for the pentagram. The first being, of course, every man and woman is a star, the symbol of the human, the 4 elements and the consciousness in using the 4 elements. But upon this, we also find that the pentagram is a tool used in necromancy or death magic to call down, invoke, or evoke entities. But to the Freemasons, the pentagram is actually a symbol of the star Sirius, and they call that the blazing star. And you'll see that On star, On being the city of the sun in Egypt, is of the same concept. And once you start to recognize all these things, you'll be able to decipher every corporate logo you ever see. So Sirius is actually our goddess, as we start to recognize who she is. Columbia goes back through Athena, Minerva, all the way back till you get to Isis. And Isis was known as Sophis, who is a representation of Sirius, the star cluster, the brightest star in the sky. Now Sirius is well known, and also our goddess is well known for their connections with amphibian beings, or fish people. And perhaps that would explain the Cthulhu or pentagram on the Necronomicon. But you'll see that she has always been connected with the fish people, and as we get a little deeper, we'll find that Sirius has always also been connected with fish people. If you look at the Starbucks logo, you'll see that actually the original incarnation of the Starbucks logo is the Skyla holding her two fins above her head, and so those are her ankles behind her head, not her hands. And this was how they used to explain that, how we had sex with the fish people. So as we start to look into the device of the pyramid, you'll find that it actually is directed towards Alpha Draconis and Sirius, are two of the portals that go out of the pyramid. And this pyramid here that stands in front of the Louvre actually has 666 panes of glass, which is kind of an interesting thing that we'll get deeper to. So as we start to look at the controlling factors of humanity, the royalty or the divine right to rule, and then those that claim that they are the emissaries or the messengers or the very voice of God, we start to find that they too have these connections between Draco and Sirius. Because the Draconians are recognized as a reptilian race, and the Syrians known as an amphibian race. Now this could be symbolic, but yet as you start to look deeper and deeper into the ancient astronaut theory, you'll start to maybe believe it. But so as we started to look into the understanding of the reptiles and the fish people, and these that create the very belief systems that keep us all trapped from being the magi that we truly are, I found some interesting correlations. Because exopolitics is now a new study as we start to understand our galaxy and our universe and all the beings that most likely exist in it. And I've been told that there are 59 to 57 alien species interacting with planet Earth at this time, and that actually humans and surface dwellers aren't the only inhabitants that are sentient on planet Earth. But I found it truly intriguing that the Draconians, or the Alpha Draconan reptilians, were described as the controlling human elites, institutions, and financial systems, militarism, creating a climate of scarcity, struggle, and insecurity, harvesting humans, and manipulating the Greys and Earth reptilians. Now that's straight from the college course of exopolitics for the Draconian reptilians. And then the Syrians, the amphibian ones, participate in technology exchange programs and promote military cooperation with potential extraterrestrial threats. I can't help it, you know, here she is represented by a reptile and him dressed up as Dagon with his shell sitting there in front of him. I really got to question whether there's some validity to this. As we start to look into the connections between Sirius and the amphibians, we find that there was an ancient tribe known as the Dogon, and they're not the only ones, but they are the most popular recently through a book named The Sirius Mystery, which came out in 1976, and it was an anthropological study of the Dogon tribe, who are an aboriginal tribe of Mali, Africa. And they seem to have all the knowledge and understanding of the astrophysics of Sirius, of the star cluster Sirius, when we ourselves couldn't even see it until, or photograph it until the 70s. They knew already that it was a binary star system for 5,000 years, when we're only now starting to realize that. And they say that Sirius B, which is Po, they call it Po or Digitaria, is the heaviest thing in the universe. And our scientists are actually finding that they're right. And they actually say that all of creation in this galaxy circles around Sagittarius or Sirius B. And what I found really curious is that when asked how they came about this knowledge of the star Sirius, they were told, well, the abominable, what do they call it? The repulsive abomination was their name for God. The repulsive abomination, or the Noma, the amphibians came and taught them all the secrets of the solar system, and especially focusing on Sirius. Now, I myself was working on an artwork when I was 10 years old, and ended up drawing these 4 space shuttles fighting a flying serpent. And in the middle of that, I drew what I thought was a spiral galaxy, but what I later found out was actually a craft. And what you'll see is on each of the space shuttles, I put a symbol. Now, I don't know if any of you have heard about our psychic corporations known as like Sci-Tech, or the ideas of remote viewing, or the fact that the military has found that we're all psychic. So there is a corporation now known as Sci-Tech that does psychic remote viewing for many corporations. So I did a bit of remote viewing myself and ended up with this image, and then 20 years later started to decipher it, still owning the picture, and I found that the very symbol that I put on each of the space shuttles was the exact same symbol that the Dogon were given for Sirius. And if you remember that the Freemason symbol for Sirius is the blazing star, and that is actually the symbol that's on NASA. And as you start to look into our space shuttle system, and you'll find that their actual titles, the names of the space shuttle, the Columbia Endeavor for the discovery of Atlantis, and all challengers will be destroyed. Right? Well, as I started to look deeper, and I came across a man who seemed to also have been contacted by some extraterrestrials. His name was David Sereda. He started to understand hyperdimensional physics through what he had seen in the craft that were filmed by the Columbia Space Shuttle, which is that circular thing right there. There were numerous craft that were filmed by the Columbia Space Shuttle, and they seem to be 2 to 3 miles long. And within them, you'll see a spiral, much as the spiral that I drew inside of my picture. And you'll see the little notch in my picture and the little notch on the space or the craft there. That's actual footage from the Columbia. So I seem to have this genetic knowledge, this ancient knowledge that's either within me or being tapped into when I was 10 years old, and it's taken me this long, I'm 40 now, to try and understand what I was trying to tell myself at 10. And it all has to do with Sirius and the fish people and the Draconians. So the ancient astronauts, when we start to really realize the beginnings of civilization, you'll recognize that it was of high technological standards and things that we can't accomplish today, whereas Baalbek, Lebanon has stones that are 1,500 tons, and we couldn't even consider moving them today, yet they were moving them in the ancient past. All of these things that show us that there was absolutely more knowledge back then of gravitational feats and of well, you'll find that magic and electromagnetic systems run concurrent. You can't escape magic and magnets. They go hand in hand most of the time. But most of these things you'll find were actually global-sized devices. These things that we call monuments are actually geomancy, or manipulating the Earth vibration. And recently, the Cassini satellite sent back photos of the Death Star, which is orbiting Saturn. So actually Star Wars has a lot more validity to it than you might think, and it's actually a coded history of the arrival. And the Cassini satellite has absolutely taken photographs of this Death Star orbiting Saturn. Now it's ancient. It's from way distant past. It's deteriorating. It has a 12-mile wall around the exact equator where the two halves that are tetrahedral were put together. It's a device. It's not a moon. That's a space station. Zahi Hawass, he's the head of the Giza Plateau. He has actually now announced that they found Osiris's tomb in these deep subterranean realms, and they announced it on Fox News, and it's all in my film if you want to see that. And all of my films, if you really catch on to little pieces of what I'm talking about, I've got 30 hours films on Google Video. So any one of these topics you want to get deeper into, go to freemantv.com, and that'll open all kinds of things for you. I'm really giving you a really brief overview of everything. And of course, the fish people there, again, in the ancient, the priest, the high priest of Dagon. So as I started to understand all these things and recognizing that our leaders were actually ceremonial magicians and that this was actually acts of magic that I was seeing before me, when the Y2K celebration was coming forth, I found that I wasn't as concerned about a computer meltdown as I was that the Freemasons were going to cap the Great Pyramid with gold. To me, this was completion. They were announcing they were done and that they were ready to control everything. Now, at this time, when the Y2K thing, the paranoia was building, they used this to build a command central, or a giant subterranean base that is used to route all the resources through it. And they have subterranean drilling devices that are able to travel 14 miles a day underground, leaving humongous 50-foot holes just like butter. So our entire realm right now, we're standing on top of a whole other world that's existing below us. Now, as they were setting forth to cap the Great Pyramid with gold, the high-tech scientists of Jet Propulsion's laboratories and the Egyptian military were combining together, and they actually, 33 Egyptian military were on their way to the Giza Plateau when their plane suddenly crashed into the ocean. And the pilot called out a Muslim prayer, so they called this pilot suicide, because this is before they decided to introduce the concept of terrorism. Y2K, we didn't have terrorists, we had pilot suicides. And if you recognize that the very hieroglyph for Sirius is an obelisk, a dome, and a pentagram, so our capitals are actually giant life-size hieroglyphs to Sirius. And Marv. So as we entered this new age of Horus is what they announced in the ceremonies of Y2K. Now what they did is Egypt had their massive campaign where they were going to cap the Great Pyramid with gold. Jean-Michel Jarre was playing the 12 Dreams of the Sun. In England, they put the dome up to counter the Old Ben or Big Ben, and they burnt the river Thames to the speed of the sun, like the river Styx. And then the Americans, Paris ignited their phallus, which was put up by the Freemasons, and America ignited their phallus. But then they also made the sun rise in the west, or the star of the west, Murica again. But this is symbolic of Horus. And what we find is that they were identifying the age of the dark hero, or the age of the vengeful hero, which Horus was to come back and be the vengeance against Set. So as this all began, we started getting moved into a new mindset of the age of the dark hero, and Superman drops dead, or is killed, and is replaced by a hellspawn. And so we move into the darker. Batman had his back broken, and he was replaced by Azrael, the fallen angel that led all them here to come and rape all the women of Earth. So that we were moved now into the age of the slasher killer hero, or the dark hero. And V for Vendetta does not escape my notice in this area. Enchanting, isn't it? All they need to do is put a little simple program into the meme, into the consciousness, and all of a sudden everybody's enacting it. And the very concepts that are promoted by V for Vendetta are that trauma-based mind control is good for you, and that violence is the answer. You might not agree with my synopsis of V for Vendetta, but that's the way I see it, as he takes Adam Weishaupt's philosophies, crosses them with Aleister Crowley rituals, and then promotes trauma-based mind control to become clear, as a Scientologist would say. If you watch the movie, you'll know what I'm talking about. But as you see, what they do actually is to implant these belief systems within us, and then we react. Now, if you actually knew who Guy Fawkes was, I seriously doubt you'd be dressing up as him, because he was the original fall guy. He was put into placement during the King James era And as what had happened was the Catholics were brought to attack the Parliament and blow up King James in the gunpowder plot. And that's the whole story for V for Vendetta. But what it actually was another false flag terrorist act of prestidigitation or magic to get people to act the way they needed them to act. And so Guy Fawkes was actually brought forth as the sacrificial fall guy, and he's where we get that word because he was the original Guy. His name's really Guido, but he's known as Guy. And this story comes down because it was the Pierce or the Percy bloodline that was involved in this, and they changed their name to Piercy. The Piercy bloodline was the ones that blew up or were gonna blow up the Parliament. And they had to change their name to Pierce. And as you come down the line, you find that our 14th president of America was Franklin Pierce, who is the direct descendant of the Piercy who was going to blow up King James. And he was replaced by James Buchanan, who is a direct descendant of... There really is no elections. They're just placed there in these ceremonial positions, and where you constantly see these reenactments of history. So they hit us with the Hegelian dialectic, the false flag terrorist attacks, and the Superman doomsday scenario, where, oh my God, the terrorists are coming to kill us, and we all need a Homeland Security, a Patriot Act, and all of these good natures. So really, none of this works without our free will agreement. So what they do is they enact these events so that we give our free will agreement. And the current meme, the current agreement they're asking from us is to say that 90% of the population needs to die. So they're hoping that we will agree with that, and then they can go forward. Because I find that they can't do anything without our free will agreement. And so they present it to us through movies and through other means like Limits to Growth or The Matrix telling you you're a virus on this planet and need to be eradicated. And as you take this in and you agree with it, then they can actually use their magic against us. But only once we give our free will agreement. So as I tracked this guy, old W, I actually found that what we're looking at here is magic and their symbolism. What you'll find is that this guy is actually the grandson of Aleister Crowley. And you might not believe this, but her mother, Barbara's mother, Pauline Pierce, who is the same bloodline of the Pierce that tried to blow up King James, and the Pierce that was the 14th president of America, Pauline Pierce went out to have a ritual with Aleister Crowley in France, and they did a sexual ritual, of course, which brought about the Book of the Law, this most infamous book of Aleister Crowley, which is housed at the UT campus. His handwritten works are stored there. Pauline Pierce went, and after her sexual ritual with Aleister Crowley, comes back to America and gives birth to Barbara. And if you take one look at her, I think that you'll agree that she is the daughter of Aleister Crowley. But of course, this was kept secret, and therefore W is actually the grandson of Aleister Crowley. Now, what does W really mean? Right? Why do we call our president W? Well, as you start to decipher these things with Kabbalism, you'll recognize that W is actually the number 66, because in Hebrew, V is 6. And as you take it 66, you get VV or W. Only in America do we call it a double U. You know, everybody else knows it's a double V. But 66 is the number of the Quilapothic powers, or the dark side of magic. And he is actually the president of the Quillapoth. And if you look at HW and you remember that H is the symbol of the emperor, then you'll see that he's the emperor of the fallen angels, the emperor of the Quillapothic dark side. And these names are not insignificant. They were absolutely designed. And as you go through each of the corporate logos and you get to Phillips 66, you got Phillips Quillapoth, or you've got Phillips Great Work. Hitler's symbol as well. When Hitler had crafted the Volkswagen for the war, he took upon the same symbol, because you'll see the Volkswagen symbol is actually two V's interlaced. So they have the Quilapothe, the dark side, interlaced, making 666, because you've got three V's once you interlace them. So now you know why our president's known as W. And I actually predicted that he would be railroaded into office because I understood this. And once you start to decipher these things and how they actually manipulate our reality, you'll start to understand and be able to see what's actually going on with these guys, because you're more clued into these magical realms and more clued into the understandings of how these things work. And the magic of Hollywood. If you look at Walt Disney is a high-level Freemason that was hired by J. Edgar Hoover, who's a 33rd degree Freemason, to instill new concepts or new ideas into the minds of children. And you'll find that, well, being a Mouseketeer is really not good for your health. I don't honestly have enough time to give you guys the full extent of the Anna Nicole, Brittany, and mind control story, but as you start to look into these guys and you recognize what's going on, then you'll see that, all right, Christina Aguilera, Britney Spears, Lindsay Lohan, are all Mouseketeers, right? All three of them, plus Madonna and Prince, Baal and Ishtar, are all the 5 winners of the Grammys for the last 2 years. Britney's actually starting to break her programming right now, and this is what you're witnessing in all of this acting out. And there was a very interesting synchronistic and serendipitous story that you can get off of the internet that I've made a film on Britney and Anna Nicole. And Britney was raised into this higher ritual by Madonna. I think I have imagery for that, so we'll get to that. All right, let's go on. So what we see is these Mouseketeers actually being used in high-profile rituals. So when Janet Jackson's breast was bared by Mouseketeer Justin Timberlake, and you'll find that the Jacksons also have Disney connections, that they actually bared her breast and it had a golden sundial on it, and we're back to the goddess and the god again, and the symbols of the hermaphrodite. And that was not by accident. This is a high-profile ritual for everybody to witness. And then the concept of the Nike placing the godship or goddessship onto Athena was reenacted with the MTV Awards, as Madonna and Britney and Christina Aguilera all practiced a massive ritual in front of us, and Madonna passed on her Madonna-ship onto Britney, and she became known as Esther, which is, of course, Ishtar, and then sealed that all with a kiss. So what we're seeing in our Hollywood theaters and then promoted to us are not actually just entertainment, but our high-profile rituals being acted before us. And then also within our capitals, and you'll see the same symbolism and the same magic going down as they pass this along through the generations. As Bill Clinton said, our children are ready. Now in Hebrew, our goddess is known as the Shekinah, or the Shekhinah, or otherwise maybe pronounced the Shekinah. Now consider this what occurred in the Shekinah campaign. As we went and attacked Baghdad, they called it the Shekinah campaign, and all the newscasters were going, well, I don't see much Shekinah, and they realized that Saddam Hussein had just announced that he was Nebuchadnezzar reincarnated, and he was rebuilding the palace of Babylon, and rebuilding Nebuchadnezzar's palace. So as the divine W came down with his Shekinah, or his Shekinah, and attacked Nebuchadnezzar using the mother of all bombs, or what is known as the Moab. And this is the very same story that you'll find of Nebuchadnezzar, and it's a reenactment of this ceremony of the death of Nebuchadnezzar. And of course it was the American government that put Saddam Hussein in power in the first place. So this ritual was set up to be enacted at a later date. So they get Nebuchadnezzar into power, they attack him with the Shekinah, and they use the mother or the Moab bomb to blow him up. This is all ritual. It is not warfare. They keep you in a state of confusion as they tell you to support your troops, or so you're lost in that mind control of, well, yeah, I support the troops, but not the war. And once you realize that it's not even really a war, but just a giant ritual sacrifice of humans, then you really should be opposed to it. And of course, he's CIA, he's KGB, Blair's MI6, and you'll realize that the spooks are all in charge. And once you realize that the spooks are all members of these occultic orders that are actually practicing magic instead of politics, this is actually not what it appears. So, when I got to Star Wars, I realized that what's going on in Star Wars is another projection as the decline and fall of America. The latest movie of Star Wars actually has the Emperor becoming, or a senator becoming the Emperor as the Republic crashes and falls, and then he has a clone army to take over and take over the world. Well, before they could do that, they had to kill off all the Magi, or what the Star Wars knew as the Jedi. And these, with their spiritual powers intact and able to defeat them. So when the Emperor decided to kill off these magicians, he went and said, "Execute Order 66. Now, you watch the movie, they say it 3 times just so that you don't miss it. And every time they say execute W, they come out and they slaughter all of the magicians or the Jedi. So at this current point, we are actually being introduced into a slaughterhouse, and they have executed the Order 66. We didn't get the video, huh? All right. So let's liven this up a little bit. I put this little clip together where it's actually last month's news. And to give you an idea of what they're doing to our consciousness and exactly what they expect from us in our reactions. Now, as I was watching, what I realized is that we are entering an age of Project Mayhem, where they want us to think that we're all crazy and that we're going crazy. And so they've got team sport killings of the homeless, Madonna or Britney freaking out, Anna Nicole dropping dead in a ritual, which I didn't get to. The whole ritual of Anna Nicole's kind of an astounding story. I highly recommend checking it out online. I'm trying to shorten this thing up. So, but this was what was going on as they were entering this mindset into us. And yeah, I call this got trauma.
Tech problem.
Tech problem?
Yeah, I'm gonna take shots and say I know what to do.
Yeah. Now the story of Anna Nicole is going to come up in this, and what you got to recognize now is that the whole story of Anna Nicole was way more than what anybody thought it might have been. What we're looking at is a woman who was brought up through child molestation, and this is their methods of mind control. She had been raped her entire childhood, as many had been, as Madonna had been, as Prince has been. They've all been put through this mind control and then raised by Disney. Okay, so they take these abused children that now have multi-personalities or dissociative identity disorder, and they use them in rituals, and they use these different personalities to do their rituals for them and to incarnate and become the entities that they need them to be. So as we look into the story of Anna Nicole was actually given to an oil Nazi baron so that she would inherit his $1 billion, but it wasn't really for her because she was the sacrificial goddess. It was for her child. And what you'll find is that as she was given to this billionaire Nazi, he died a year later as expected, and so then now the money's floating up in escrow. And then she was brought to Hollywood and gave birth to Daniel Lynn, her daughter. Everybody was wondering, who's the daddy, right? Because she's a sexual mind control slave. And she had been passed around to numerous people, and nobody was really too sure who had fathered this little girl. What we find is that on 3 days after the birth of the little girl, the firstborn son, Daniel, is brought into the room and drops dead in front of the baby. And then 3 months later, in the front of the baby, Anna Nicole drops dead in, of course, this symbol of death and resurrection, Hollywood, Florida. And so now we have this little baby that nobody knows the origins of, that has had two deaths put in front of her in a ritual fashion, the death of the firstborn and the death of the goddess. And as we start to look into the claimants of who is the father of Daniel Lynn Smith, and we find one that is very curious, which is Prince Frederick von Anhalt, who happens to own Zsa Zsa Gabor, which is another mind control slave from the ancient past. He keeps her locked up in his mansion with a padlock while he's out having sex with Anna Nicole. And he says, oh yes, you know, on some night, what we don't remember, it was me that gave birth to Daniel Lynn. But as you start to look into Prince Frederick von Anhalt, you find out that he's actually a Nazi genetic experiment, much like the boys from Brazil, and that it was a artificial insemination of Gretel Braun with Hitler's semen to bring about Prince Frederick von Anhalt. And now Prince Frederick von Anhalt, the Rothschild, because if you recognize Hitler's true bloodline as a Rothschild, so the baby is a Rothschild with two death rituals been performed in front of it, and now has the $1 billion of a Nazi oil baron.
And it's coming fast. It's all around the corner now.
I'll look around, look for really meaningful signs that really change. I don't see it right now.
And we're going to look now at what some of the most popular stories of the day on CNN.com are, and definitely the Anna Nicole Smith story, but there are other stories as well. Richard, what really is Latin headline controller? Is this for the world? Richard, we have on these random attacks. It's such a sad trend.
Yeah, team sport killings is what it is. Let's be honest tonight, and yeah, kids in the room, please ask them to leave for a second, because I'm going to be real honest. This is, for a lot of sick people, this is masturbation to hot women who are dead.
They say nature's been going crazy. All kinds of unusual catastrophes like a nature hike through the book of Revelation.
Effectively what we call propaganda.
Influencing your children.
Stop acting like a fool, Miles, and accept us.
And that's when nightmare became a reality.
Perhaps the most shocking homeless beating happened January 12th of last year in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, when a surveillance camera captured two teenagers beating a homeless man with a bat. Police say 3 teenagers went on a rampage, beating 3 homeless men.
Okay, I'm going to be real honest with you. I'm a typical guy. I think hot women are just great. I really do. It's like I think that God has put some sort of steel in their butts and magnets in my eyes, because no matter how hard I try to look there, with that being said, I at least try not to look at these things. And now we're doing as a society, we're not only showing hot women all the time, we're mixing it with death.
And to talk about that. She talked about that really from the time I met her.
When you go out very often till 4 o'clock in the morning and you need people, you do something, things you don't even know the next day what you did.
especially near the end of her life, where she seemed to be under the influence of drugs, and then this one, she just seemed pure angry.
Britney Spears came in and sat in my chair and said, I want to shave my hair off. And I said, well, I'm not shaving your hair off.
A moment's sleep, and the girl I loved was an inhuman enemy bent on my destruction. That moment's sleep was death to Becky Soul, just as it had been for Jack and Teddy and Dan Colton and all the rest. Their bodies were now hosts, harboring an alien form of life, a cosmic form, which to survive must take over every human man. So I ran as little Jimmy Grimaldi had run the other day. My only hope was to get away from Santa Vera, to get to the highway, to warn the others of what was happening.
Discovered in Dahmer's apartment was horrifying. Body parts in a barrel, a human head in a refrigerator. When he confessed, the gruesome details were almost impossible to comprehend. What was it, Jeff, that took you over the edge? A new scientific study shows that for the first time they're finding polar bears that have actually drowned.
I should have killed 500 people, then I would have felt better. And when I felt like I was really offering society something, believe me, if I started murdering people, it'd be none of your left. The environmental extreme will be up to our neck in owls and out of work for every American. We didn't do nothing with this serial killer. Sure, we got a little problem with necrophilia. I admit it, but you can't bounce back. Madonna has powers that she uses homosexual activity on stage before her fans to desensitize them. She knows that if she shows homosexual activity over and over again, the convictions of her audiences will be eroded. Listen to what Madonna said to a homosexual magazine. If you go back and show a shot of the woman in the thigh highs with blood all over her, you tell me that is empowering for women. I'm sorry, I just don't accept it. You know what this does? This promotes violence in the sickest sense. You are taking beautiful, hot women in a society that loves violence, that many times condones violence against women, and shows them like this. This is not good.
Well, I think this is meant more in a campy way, such as a slasher film. Oh my God, it was crazy. We locked the doors and we tried to close the curtains, but they would have charged in there if the door was unlocked.
So right now, Michael Connor has now been sworn in as the person in the Simpsons movie. Politics Truth was hired Vice Admiral